This is Jeremy. Welcome to Eighthworld. Good morning, everyone. This is Jeremy. Welcome to the second episode of Eighthworld. I am recording this on the morning of Sunday, February 16th, 2020. Today would have been my dad's 64th birthday. We lost him back in September after a lengthy battle with cardiac issues and several strokes that followed. He was on hospice care for a week before passing, and I gotta say, it was a pretty difficult time. It still is, to be honest, just sitting here thinking about it, trying to talk about it. But I hope that this can be a candid and beneficial way to deal with that, and also to perhaps stand as some sort of simple tribute to him. I owe a lot to my dad. Anybody listening to this who knows me has heard me talk about it or has seen me write about it, that I owe my fandoms to my dad. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, when I was a kid, my dad would always have Star Trek, Star Wars, other science fiction going, and he also encouraged my early interests in superheroes. When I got older and also developed an interest in fantasy, particularly, the Lord of the Rings, things like that, he was very supportive, fully supportive. So I owe a lot to my dad. And I know that in the last episode I talked a bit about how I wanted to move on from Star Trek Picard to Star Trek Discovery this episode, and I'll still do that, but I wanted to talk about other things too. My dad grew up watching Star Trek, just like I did. He watched the original series in its original airing. In fact, he was 9-10 years old when it started airing in '66. As a young man, he saw the original Star Wars trilogy for the first time in theaters. And, I envy him those things sometimes, to be part of so many things at the beginning. But it helped me to see those things through his eyes as well. Now, my dad was that early generation. And I'll be completely honest, my dad was a fairly conservative man. Didn't like things to change too quickly. But there were times over the years when we talked and how he recognized that things would change regardless, and he didn't always think it was necessarily a bad thing. So, with that, would my dad have enjoyed Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Picard? I'm honestly not sure. I don't know if he ever saw a glimpse of what Discovery was trying to do back when it first started, and, I'm not sure he even heard of them working on Picard before he passed away, but I like to think that he would have enjoyed aspects of them, certainly, because he loved that franchise. My dad was into a lot of things that I wasn't. He was also a sports fan, and I've never really been into that. But ever since he was a child, he loved the New Orleans Saints. That was our home team, our regional team. We lived in Mississippi, but that was our closest professional sports team. My dad taught me a lot about how not to be a fair-weather fan by loving the New Orleans Saints. Even their fans would sometimes call them the Aints. How they accomplished very little, usually didn't play very well, never placed in anything, but every once in a while they would surprise you, and he loved that. In fact, one of my favorite memories of him is earlier last decade, that one time the Saints made it to the Super Bowl. We hung out in my apartment together and watched it, and it was great. I didn't have any idea what was going on, but being able to experience that with my dad, to see his rush of emotions, to see what it meant to him, I loved that. And seeing that's the same way I feel watching the things that I watch. To be fair, there's not so much of a difference between us, who are proud, self-described nerds, and sports fans. Really, sports fans are sports nerds when you get right down to it. Or geeks or dorks or whatever nomenclature you want to use. I know that there are subtle differences among all of them, but everybody has their preferred term. Now, how does all of this relate? My dad grew up watching the original series, and that was the bedrock upon which he judged every other piece of Star Trek. Now, a lot of people will say that Discovery is not real Star Trek, that it betrays something of Star Trek's message, that ultimately it's not enough like The Next Generation. But you know what it is like? It's like the original series, and let me tell you why. Star Trek the original series was a swashbuckling adventure show with a heart, with morals, with a way of looking at the world that was far ahead of its time for the mid to late 60s. It made issues of the day into non-issues, as much good sci-fi should. You know, on the bridge, you had Uhura, a black woman. You had Sulu, a Japanese man. You had Chekhov, a completely pretend Russian man, but who was still a representative of the United States' biggest enemy at the time. It was Gene Roddenberry's hope with this show, with those characters, that he could show a brighter future where humanity had overcome its differences. And that was beautiful. It still is. Whether or not my dad ever fully internalized all of those lessons were still present in his mind, and they still informed who he became as a person and who he helped me become as a person by raising me on the same things. Now, Discovery is a child of a different time, but it is still, as Star Trek always should be, a story about our future. Now, how would the future seen from the 1960s differ from how we would see the future today? There are certainly a lot of considerations to bring into play there, but I think maybe one of the most obvious is how Discovery is finally giving us our first obvious same-sex couple in Paul Stamets and Dr. Culber. Would my dad have been fully comfortable with that? I don't know. He was a man of a different era, and nobody is perfect on every front. I'll put it that way. But I think that it is important that Star Trek has taken this step forward, and it's something that should have happened a long time ago, something that very nearly did at several points from what some of my research shows. Apparently there were attempts during The Next Generation to introduce side or one-off characters who were gay. There was a long-standing rumor, though I don't know how much truth there is to it, that 7 of 9 was originally supposed to be a gay character on Voyager, but they feared the censors and shot that down, and that's why in Voyager you ended up with the really forced relationship between 7 of 9 and Chakotay. Further, Star Trek has always encouraged us to see the best of ourselves in the other. You look at Mr. Spock in the original series, you look at Data, you look at Worf in The Next Generation, you look at Jadzia Dax in Deep Space Nine. You have people who are fiercely intelligent, but also fiercely loyal, who will stand beside and die for their friends, and are even capable of befriending a great many different types of people. And I feel that continues with Star Trek Discovery, with the character of Saru especially. It's always the non-human characters to me who are the most fascinating in Star Trek. I think that ultimately it is important that you experience anything yourself. And what I mean by that is you should not rely solely upon someone else's recommendations or opinions of something to decide whether or not that you'll like it, or whether or not you'll consider it a waste of your time. Because honestly, no two people have a quantifiably exact taste when it comes to anything. Books, television, movies, politics, religion. Everybody's looking for something different. And to know if something like Star Trek Picard or Star Trek Discovery will hit all those right points for you, you have to experience it yourself. Don't be sheep, my friends. Don't be sheep. Go in, give it a try. Don't listen to spam bots on Twitter. I think that it's also important to recognize that resisting a franchise or boycotting a single item that it puts out, this is relevant to Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Discovery. It was even relevant to Solo, the Star Wars movie that underperformed based on Disney standards. When you stand up to these studios, to these big companies, what you're basically telling them is that it's actually not worth it to put as much time, effort, and allocate as many resources to these projects as they thought it would be. You're not telling them that they're on the wrong track with a specific entry into their franchise. You're telling them that the franchise itself is not a wise investment. You're endangering the future of that entire franchise when you do this. honestly, you could inadvertently kill Star Trek if you don't want to give Discovery or Picard a chance. You know, it's been nearly 20 years since we've had two Star Trek series on at the same time, and I imagine a lot of people talked smack about Enterprise when it was on, because Enterprise had a lot of weaknesses, but it inevitably found itself, and once it found itself, if you went back and looked at the constituent parts, as it was trying to find itself, you began to see the strength of the whole. You began to see the goal of the writers. I mean, Star Trek has never been a perfect thing. Every series has episodes that people like to laughingly kind of wave their hand at and ignore. Every series has beautiful, perfect episodes. Every series has its ups and downs, things that people don't like, things that people love. I mean, a lot of people love Voyager more than Deep Space Nine for some reason, even though it had a lot of weak episodes. And I'm not saying that I dislike it. I love all of Star Trek. I am not a Fairweather fan. All I'm saying is that it is worth giving everything a chance. And I enjoy Discovery. Starting out, I was hesitant. I was kind of on that same bandwagon of I'm not sure if I want this to be updated and changed the way I know that it's going to be. But those older Star Trek series will always be. Nothing's ever going to change that. If you absolutely cannot allow yourself to evolve along those lines, those other shows will always be there for you. And I just don't think that with our current sensibilities or what we look for from storytelling and television today, that we can make something like those again. And perhaps that's why Enterprise started going downhill, because it really picked up in quality once it became less episodic, when the episodes worked together, and when those episodes also showed issues at play in the world today, and also began trying to expand the lore of the universe. The most memorable things about that fourth season of Enterprise were the Terra Prime episodes, the xenophobic aspects of human culture that were trying to prevent Earth from allying with alien powers. That and the Romulan stuff. I mean, the Romulans have always been fascinating in Star Trek because of what we choose to see them as representing at any time. And Picard presents a really interesting mix of things with the Romulans. Because yes, you can look at modern day politics, modern day issues, and say that the Romulans are a largely refugee power now. That's something that's kind of a hot button topic these days. But also, you look at Romulan culture, and Romulans are deceitful, they're devious, they will use their own people as weapons, as lures. And that is also a kind of commentary on things going on in the world that people might not be very comfortable talking about. So there's a lot to redeem Picard, even if these first few episodes have not been what you wanted them to be. And I can understand that. I mean, it's a change, and it's also uncomfortable, I understand, to have this idea of what Star Trek represents, to have this idea of what the Federation and Starfleet represent, and have that turned on its ear by this show. And I mean, like I talked about last time, the Federation's never been squeaky clean in its presentation. Ever since the original series, there have been aspects of it that have not been completely desirable. But even so, there's a lot of good. It's worth saving, is the thing. And what Picard is doing is fighting for this dream of the Federation that he believes in. And to return to where I began with this rambling narrative, this latest episode of Picard, the fourth episode I believe, where Picard goes to retrieve Elnor. And by the way, meeting these Romulan assassin nuns who are totally the Bene Gesserit from Dune, that's awesome. I love the idea of these sci-fi greats referencing each other in such ways. But when Picard goes to get Elnor, I loved it. I loved it because just from the prologue of that episode, you see that Elnor is Picard's adopted son, and he is going as this old man who knows that his time is limited because of the diagnosis that he received a couple of episodes ago, and that this is a dangerous mission and could end catastrophically at any time. He wants to make some things right, so he goes to the only child that he effectively ever had that we've been shown, and brings him along, and he instructs him. He chastises him for doing something that he does not see as morally right. So he establishes this father-son relationship immediately, and I am interested to see where it goes, because so much of sci-fi fandom has been fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, etc. These people passing on to the next generation these things that they love. And I want to see that continue more than anything. anything. And for something to continue to hold value, it has to be updated from time to time. Because the future of the 1960s, the future of the 1980s, what people foresaw in those days, it's not the same as the future of today. Things are changing. Technology is advancing in ways that we cannot foresee clearly. So if one of your biggest beefs with Picard or with Discovery is its aesthetic, the way that technology seems to not be conclusively consistent across the board, that's something that can be easily looked past. Because, I'll be honest with you, I thought that the original Enterprise bridge set that they created for the second season of Discovery was beautiful. It was perfect, and they managed to update it to their aesthetic without betraying it. And I would encourage you to maybe look at Discovery and Picard in that way. These are being updated, but that is not a betrayal. As one final note, I will concede that Discovery especially has some issues that I've noted with their use of secondary characters especially. Really, the primary characters on Discovery get a lot of development. Michael, Tilly, Saru, Captain Pike, Captain Giorgio at times. But really the secondary characters need more screen time. Paul Stamets, Dr. Culber, they get their screen time as well. But we've got a lot of characters on the show that really haven't carried an episode yet, and I'll admit, something I liked most about older Star Trek is how you would have episodes that were completely devoted to a story about one of the other characters in the cast. And I think that that is maybe something that has been lost going forward. Because Discovery had a really interesting episode in its second season involving the character Arium, who we see in the episode, see it confirmed in the episode anyway, that she's actually human, but she was in some sort of terrible accident that involved her being placed into a mostly robotic body, and that she has difficulty storing memories, and she has this weird Johnny Mnemonic style of deleting unnecessary memories and storing important ones. And sadly, even the most important memories she has of her and her husband, it looks like it was recorded on a cell phone. It wasn't even from her perspective. And we get all of this, and her death, all in just one episode. And that's the most development the character ever goes through or will go through because she's dead now. That was troubling, but I can go with that if I have to. I just hope that the other bridge crew of the Discovery end up seeing some development, and maybe we will in future seasons, because it looks like the setup for season 3 is smaller crew, smaller cast, going on adventures in the future. So I'm interested in seeing what will become of that. On the topic of seeing a franchise harmed by fan reception, you really need to look no further than other science fiction, with BioWare's Mass Effect series, actually. I loved all the games, including Mass Effect Andromeda, the most recent one, and the one that really garnered the most hate, because pretty much everybody who was vocal on the internet about it talked about how much they hated it, how much they thought it was some sort of betrayal of what the others were, and that it was full of pointless messages. And I must have been playing a different game or something, because I never saw any of the issues that a lot of these people saw. Yes, the face renders maybe at times were a little rough, but it didn't really bother me that much. I don't know, maybe I'm just old, but I remember playing games that looked horrendous in hindsight and becoming swept up in the story. That doesn't really bother me. Maybe I'm just weird that way. But anyway, BioWare and their parent company EA basically heard all the negative feedback from Andromeda and cited that as one of the reasons not to really go forward with anything else in the Mass Effect universe for a while. Because they had story in place, they had places in the story to expand it, to release expansions for Mass Effect Andromeda, but they didn't. They decided it wasn't worth the work, and in fact, the biggest plot point in the game for an expansion set or downloadable content ended up being made into a novel. So obviously they already had a lot of work going into that, and then they just decided to release it in a different format and get it off the table, because once that was done, there was nothing else to do with it. So I think that it is important to bear in mind that we, as a market, just to use that phraseology, have a lot of power when it comes to what we consume. But it's also important to note that we have more power to destroy than to improve. And really, I want you to come away with a couple of ideas from elsewhere here. Storytelling is not a democracy. You don't get to vote on it. You don't get to choose your own adventure for most of these things. Usually, you're going to be following what somebody else has already laid out, has put a lot of work into laying out. because, believe it or not, writing is not that easy a thing to do. Nor is writing a structured story that pays off. And you can argue up and down that these stories don't pay off, but that's not really why I'm here. And also, to paraphrase Neil Gaiman when he was speaking about George R.R. Martin specifically, no writer is your bitch. No one is out there writing for you specifically. They do not answer to you. Alright? Bear that in mind going forward. Eighthworld is, and always shall be, partnered with and sponsored by Misplaced Muse Creative, an excellent source for bookish gifts, warm beverages, and wax goods. I'll include links to their social media in the episode description. Please leave a like and a follow on this video, and please, if I've said something that you feel strongly about or wish to continue a conversation about, feel free to leave a comment. I'll be sure to reply in the future. I'll even have episodes geared entirely toward meeting comments and replying to them and furthering a conversation, because I'm not interested in trying to assert myself as some sort of all-knowing oracle when it comes to nerd culture or how the real world has influenced nerd culture. I just want to talk about these things, and I want to talk about them in a manner that is kind, because I think that there's far, far too much vitriol on the internet these days. But anyway, that's today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. This has been Jeremy, and this is, as always, Eighthworld.